The yelp of a phone shutter cut through the afternoon like a bell. Someone's recording light was a tiny, insistent star over the crowd. Another phone vibrated with the sound of a live stream notification. Malcolm tasted iron and dry dust at the back of his throat. The world narrowed to the weight of a boot and the cold press of leather where an officer's fingers dug into his shoulder. Ryan Blake's knee was a simple, terrible geometry. Weight, angle, insistence. It flattened the small of Malcolm's back against the hot asphalt where the white paint of the parking line flaked beneath them. "Hands! Hands where I can see them," Blake barked. His voice did not carry anger so much as the practiced cadence of command, the clipped consonants of someone used to being obeyed. Nearby, Officer Jason Reed's jaw worked. His eyes flicked from Blake to the boy and back again, the unease there like a bruise beneath his uniform shirt. People gathered along the storefronts, their heads turned, faces shading phones as if they were watching a bad scene in a movie. Except this was not a movie, and the urgency in the air made laughter impossible. A white envelope poked from Malcolm's backpack, the MIT acceptance packet he had not yet opened. In the scramble that had followed, Blake's shove, Malcolm's reflexive attempt to shield his face, it had slid free and splayed out like a dropped flag. Someone's breath hitched in the crowd. The envelope's corner smudged with asphalt. Amanda Fletcher, who worked at the electronics kiosk, pushed forward through a gap in the crowd, waving an iPad in one hand and the thermal strip of a receipt in the other. "That's his receipt," she shouted, voice thin but urgent. "He bought a sweatshirt. I have it. Time-stamped. Card swipe. You can check the video." Blake's boot shifted. His other hand, quick as panic, yanked something from Malcolm's belt. Metal flashed. The smell of ozone from a drawn weapon whispered across the hot air. "Drop it," he said, level, without humor. The command flattened any other thought. Malcolm's palms went out, splayed, instinctive and small. "I didn't," he started. "You shut up and keep your hands where I can see them," Blake cut in. He pressed his weight more deliberately. The grind of the knee was a punctuation mark. Phones around them hummed and clicked. Someone muttered a prayer. Another person swore softly. "Sir," Amanda said, holding up the iPad. The small screen played a looped clip of a man in a dark hoodie, hands in the glass case, sliding a boxed camera beneath his jacket. The timestamp in the corner read 27 minutes earlier. "That's not him. Look at the build, the walk. My register shows this sale. Receipt matches his card. You'll see the MIT letter. It's in his bag." Blake's eyes narrowed. In his face, the words "I'm in control" were carved like a slogan. "You stay back," he told Amanda, not unkindly but without invitation. He moved with the economy of someone making decisions he'd practiced until they had the gloss of inevitability. Malcolm's breath hitched. The knee dug deeper. He tried to keep his voice flat, even. "Ma'am, officer, I'm on the honor roll. I got accepted. It's for my sister. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Blake repeated. Reed shifted, body leaning away from Blake's proximity, as if the pressure might be contagious. He spoke finally, in a low voice that was almost to himself. "We should check the receipt first." Blake's laugh was a dry crack. "We will." He said it like a promise of delay. The MIT folder lay half-covered by a smear of dust, and Malcolm's own hoodie, dull navy blue, folded oddly, its fabric carrying the small domestic scent of detergent and his sister's cologne. The hoodie was the reason he had been in that mall at all, a birthday thing, an ordinary errand on a Saturday afternoon. The hoodie had become a symbol of everything the officers thought they saw. Someone in the crowd said, "He's a kid." It was not a command. It was an observation that felt like a plea. Malcolm's eyes found the faces in the crowd, people he did not know. A woman with a grocery bag whose knuckles were white around the plastic. A teenage girl whose lips were bitten to a pulp. A father with a stroller filmed with an expression of what looked like both fear and fascination. Blake's palm went to the thin chain of Malcolm's neck where a pendant rested like a small, private sun. He tugged, mild curiosity turning toward admonishment. "What are you doing in this parking lot?" he demanded. "Why are you here with this?" He jabbed his chin toward the scattered envelope. The word "why" landed like frost. Malcolm swallowed. "I bought a hoodie for my sister. I was in the store." His voice tightened. He felt absurdly exposed, the way you do when your life has been reduced to 5 words or a receipt. "Amanda has the receipt. She'll show you." Amanda's hand shook as she held the iPad. "You can look," she said. "You can see the swipe. The time, it's 3:10. It shows his card. He's not the one from the clip." Blake's expression did not change. He moved with the precision of someone who could read intent in posture. The tilt of Malcolm's shoulders, the slight forward lean in his walk. "You match the description," Blake said. The words were clinical, but the meaning was violent in their simplicity. Black male, hoodie, backpack. The phrase hung in the air like a verdict. Then, like a small, coordinated choreography, 2 hands came for his wrists. Cold metal clicked around Malcolm's skin. The cuff bit but did not cut. It fit like paperwork fitting into a file. Someone behind him, Reed, his voice raw, said, "Take it easy. He has a receipt, Ryan." Blake did not loosen his grip. He turned Malcolm so sudden and harsh that the MIT letter caught on the rough asphalt and fluttered open. The envelope's contents, the crisp letterhead, the careful italicized name, were exposed to sun and strangers. "Don't play intellectual games with me," Blake said. His tone was almost gentle, which made it worse. He reached down with his boot and pushed the letter so it slid under a shoe. "You're coming with us." A child's birthday plan. An acceptance letter that smelled faintly of possibility. A security guard's assumption. The geometry of the knee. The phones watching, recording, waiting for the world to register what it had just seen. Stay with this. There's more to the story than what you just witnessed. If this scene makes you uncomfortable, that's the point. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell us in the comments if you've ever seen someone stopped for no reason. Your voice matters. This isn't just one moment. It's a pattern. 30 minutes earlier, the mall had been ordinary in the way only a Saturday afternoon can be ordinary. The hum of air conditioning, the soft intercom music that tried politely and failed to drown out human conversations. The smell of fried food from the food court drifting like a benevolent fog. Malcolm had moved through it with a small, determined economy. He was careful, by habit. An honor student's patience, a boy taught to make himself small when the world demanded it. He had a list in his head for his sister's birthday. One item, really. And he navigated the kiosks with the focus of someone familiar with shopping on a budget. Amanda Fletcher had been wiping the glass of her display when he came to her counter. She was younger than she looked from a distance. Late 20s, tired smiles carved into her cheeks. But she straightened as if preparing for business when Malcolm approached. He kept his eyes calm. He handed over a card with the same care he used when he filled out forms, when he drafted essays for school competitions. There was nothing dramatic about the purchase. A hoodie, navy with a small embroidered logo. The kind that looks like thoughtfulness in thread. "Gift?" Amanda said, registering the exchange with the small kindness of a woman who had worked retail long enough to know the language of other people's urgencies. "For my sister," Malcolm answered. He felt oddly shy admitting it. He did not tell her she was turning 15 in 3 days, that she loved the color navy because it matched the eyes of the substitute teacher who let her borrow an art book that one time. He did not tell her that if he could, he would wrap the hoodie up in a way that made its edges look like a bow of promise. Amanda slid the card into the reader with a practiced flick. The beep of the terminal was soft. The thermal receipt unfurled warm from the slot, like proof. She tore it and set it into Malcolm's hand. "There you go. Happy birthday to your sister," she said. A small, "Thank you," Malcolm said. He tucked the receipt into the inside pocket of his backpack without looking at it. He folded the hoodie carefully and carried it toward the exit the way you carry something fragile when you don't want the world to know how much you value it. Brian Hughes, the mall security guard, was near the jewelry kiosk, cleaning fingerprints from a glass case with the sort of care that made his shoulders stoop. He had a radio clipped to his belt and an eye for movement, the way a hawk has an eye for motion. He watched more than he spoke.
He had grown used to the rhythms of the place. Teenagers on lunch break, parents with screaming toddlers, the man who played guitar near the southern entrance every weekend. He saw Malcolm from his post as the boy passed under the fluorescent lights. A customer hurried past, breathless, saying something about a theft down by electronics. Brian's head snapped. He watched the crosstalk on his monitor as customer service relayed a description. Dark hoodie, male, backpack, quick with his hands. The words were pragmatic. Brian's mind toggled to response. He radioed it in, voice low and professional, but there was an edge beneath it, an old instinct that tightened when the mall's shiny surface encountered its darker currents. "Keep an eye," he said into the radio. "Possible theft. Electronics. Male, black hoodie, backpack, moving toward the food court." No one said, "Stop every black person in the mall." That was not the language used. It didn't need to be. The description was vague by design. It fit too easily those who moved like Malcolm in that space. The list of traits, male, hoodie, backpack, was small and imprecise, but it was enough. When Blake and Reed arrived, not as flashy as in the movies, just two cruisers pulling into the loading zone, the red and blue lights like polite punctuation, they had the details fed to them through their car computer in brief staccato instructions. Blake, who had been on the force long enough to carry an unexamined certainty about the city's order, heard what he had been trained to hear: a threat to property, a procedural matter, and an opportunity to assert control. His boots hit the tiles with a sound like punctuation. He moved through the mall with the deliberate movement of someone confident that authority would be read and complied with. Reed followed, hands in his pockets, the younger officer who had been taught to watch his seniors' cues before deciding what to think. They reached Amanda's kiosk first by accident. Malcolm, awkward and polite, had his backpack strap over one shoulder and the hoodie tucked under his arm. He was trying to figure out where to go next. Balloons at the food court? A cake? He had the openness of someone whose life had not yet been carved by the kind of suspicion that narrows a man. Blake looked him over with a methodical inventory.
Hood up, hoodie worn low, bag held like something to be hidden. The misreading was instant and complete, a ledger book in which the charges had already been typed. He moved before he thought to ask. "Sir, come here," Blake called. Malcolm straightened. "What's—" "Hands where I can see them," Blake said, already moving. The exchange had the speed of rehearsed motion. Blake's hand on the belt, the click of a cuff, the quick step forward that made Malcolm stumble on the scuffed tile. Amanda shouted for him to stop, fumbling for her iPad, fingers too small on the glass as she pulled up the register log. "He bought the hoodie," she said. "Look, receipt, card swipe, you can see the video." But the arrest had been initiated. Everything after that snapped into the railroad tracks of procedure. Blake's attention narrowed to the essential. He had a suspect in hand. He did what officers do in that narrowing: secure, cuff, detain. The crowd congealed. Hurried by a private sensation of voyeurism and civic duty, two impulses braided together. Reed's discomfort was visible now in the way his shoulders curled inward. He mouthed something, "We should," but Blake cut him off with a look. Reed withdrew, not from malice, but from the kind of social caution that holds back the thing you know you should say, because the institutional muscle is stronger than your voice. When Blake's knee found the small of Malcolm's back near the parking lot's painted line, the stars of the phone's recording LEDs multiplied. That geometrical pressure made the air thin in Malcolm's chest. Breath, which had been an endless, unquestioned rhythm, now required negotiation. He could feel teeth grind somewhere inside his jaw. He thought of his mother calling him before he left the house. 2 short sentences about being careful, about being visible but cautious. He thought of the way she folded the laundry, the way she smoothed the hoodie before she put it away, in the hope chest of small, ordinary futures. He thought of his sister's laugh. "Please," he said, voice thinner than he wanted it to be. "Please, I bought this. I have the receipt." "Keep quiet," Blake said. He reached abruptly for Malcolm's bag and yanked it open.
The MIT envelope slid free and fluttered like a white flag across the asphalt, coming to rest beneath a heel. A small, ugly laugh escaped Blake, the kind that masks something much larger. "You're lucky this is Riverside and not someplace else," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You could be causing a lot more trouble." Amanda lunged forward and planted her legal tablet on the hood of a nearby car, the screen displaying the exact time of the sale and a still from the security feed. "This is the guy," she insisted. "Look at your feed, you'll see." "Back up," Reed said, newer to the scene, his voice shaking its way toward authority. "We need to check her evidence." Blake shrugged him off,
as if he were an afterthought. "Do it," he said, lazily, as if he were granting permission rather than being answerable to procedure. He kept his palm on the back of Malcolm's neck, and the pressure of the knee was a punctuation on his command. Malcolm heard snippets, a timer beep from the iPad, an exchange on the radio that made mention of possible mis-ID. He tried to explain again, small, concrete sentences, the purchase, the card, Amanda, but the words diluted the power of how the scene was being read. The world had already decided him dangerous by the tilt of his hoodie and the color of his skin. "Do you want me to call your parents?" Amanda asked, a kind of mercy trembling in her voice. She had stepped between a clerk's duty and a citizen's alarm, with no training in how to do justice beyond what she knew, truth. "Save the calls," Blake said. He leaned in, face close to Malcolm's ear. "We'll sort it out at the station." The belt of routine tightened. Someone in the crowd recorded Blake saying the words, a neat, damning clip that would later slice through other timelines with an efficiency social media has learned to wield. An image, a quote, a verdict. The camera's LED blinked on and off like a staccato heart. They led Malcolm to the cruiser with the cold choreography of transfer. Cuffed hands, the jolt of being shepherded into a metal box that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. He was forced to sit on the vinyl seat while the world continued to orbit without him. The windows were thick and unwelcoming, muffling the murmur of the mall. He watched Amanda through the tinted glass, her hand raised until security pulled her back, like a bishop thwarted from the altar. At Riverside Police Station, the walls held a perpetual warmth from bodies and the small, institutional scent of bleach. The holding room was a rectangle of fluorescent light where time congealed into waiting. Malcolm's wrists stung with the imprint of cuffs that had been a reminder beyond bruises, metal that whispered that he was less than the thing he'd been promised to be. He asked for a phone call. He asked for counsel. He asked for his father to be notified. "One call," the desk officer said, a formula plucked from a handbook he had read in training and then filed away. "We'll process you." Time, in a police station, had the texture of on-hold music. It stretched and looped and became an instrument of its own. Malcolm sat with the hoodie folded in his lap like a quiet accusation. He thought of the MIT letter, now hidden in a pocket of a bag that had been treated like evidence. He felt humiliation as a slow, corroding heat, that mix of shame and outrage that lives at the intersection of being seen and being stripped of story. He was allowed a call eventually, but not until officers had taken their own time to log, to check, to file. When he asked for counsel, he was told to wait. The language at the desk was clinical, evasive. The rights he had been taught in civics class existed somewhere between the lines. The delay was a small cruelty. It stretched into hours. Outside, phones had already begun to stitch the scene into a wider fabric. Small clips pooled and folded and formed a narrative in the way that social media knows how to make a moment speak louder than a courthouse. A crude hashtag fluttered into being. The evening news picked up a frame and made a tidy packet of outrage for the 10 o'clock slot. A boy kneeling, an officer's knee, a scattered letter. Symbols that would ricochet through comment sections and living rooms. Inside the station, the officers relayed their version of the incident to one another with the flatness of people restating facts to make them less heavy. Blake described his decision as a professional action, the kind of thing an officer does when suspicion migrates into probable cause. Reed's voice was quieter, He said the words that tethered him to discomfort. "I didn't like how it looked. I thought maybe—" But Blake dismissed such qualms with the same consummate finality he used to palm down a suspect's shoulder. Someone filed a report. There were forms to fill, boxes to check off. The administrative machinery hummed around them. In the stack of the file the officer compiled, the MIT envelope resembled a footnote, a personal artifact that could be cataloged and then shelved. But not everyone was willing to shelve it. In a small, cramped apartment across town, where the television glowed with the blue of a CNN chyron, director Nathan White's phone buzzed with a clip forwarded through a secure line. An eerie thing to have family and federal duty intersect in a live video. He watched it and felt the oxygen leave the room. The image of his son, twisted and small beneath a stranger's weight, made something in him go hollow and then explode into action. He knew the rhythms of bureaucracy. He knew how long institutions could languish while questions were deemed under review. He also understood, inside and out, how to move a system that had ignored similar pleadings for years. But that was later, and the afternoon still had a few beats left. Amanda standing with the iPad, Blake standing over the boy, Reed shifting from spectator to participant with a tremor that suggested future choices, and the phones, small electric witnesses that had already begun to stitch the moment into an argument. And then everything stopped. The clip of a neon asphalt, the shimmer of a recorded light, the breath held by a public that suddenly realized it had been watching more than a single misread. The camera's red dot pulsed like a heartbeat, and in that beat, the world's attention slid, slow and terrible, toward the fact that a 16-year-old boy with an acceptance letter in his backpack was being treated like a threat. The sound of the record button was a small, silent indictment. The red dot kept pulsing, a small, implacable metronome. It made every breath feel recorded, measured, accountable. Around it, the station's light hummed, and the world seemed to press in closer, as if the ceiling had learned to listen. Amanda's fingers trembled a little as she tapped the upload. She told herself precise, small lies, that she was doing a public service, that she was preserving truth. But the truth that lived in her chest was sharper. She had seen something that refused to be unseen. The clip left her iPad and folded itself into 1,000 other screens, where strangers would decide what it meant before the boy sitting on the curb had time to decide for himself. Inside the squad room, Blake finished the paperwork like a man assembling a chessboard while someone else was playing. He cataloged items, circled probable cause in the neat, habitual hand of someone who had learned to make decisions look like processes. He did not look at Malcolm more than was necessary. When he did, his face hardened into the professional blankness he used to shield himself from consequences. "Standard procedure," he said, and the words were meant as an armature against any further conversation. Reed watched the video again on Amanda's screen, but his eyes were not the same as the others. He had been the man leaning back, an unwilling second. He had felt the subtle shift from uncertain witness to participant when Blake pivoted and acted. The memory of it made his throat tighten. He thought of Malcolm's hands, how small they had seemed when they'd reached to steady himself, how quickly that gesture had been reframed as something else. For the first time since the academy, Reed had the unseasonable sensation that he might be on the wrong side of a story that would remember him by an afterimage. "You all right?" Blake asked him, voice flat. Reed forced a nod. Words withered in his mouth. Malcolm still smelled of the street, wet pavement and something like ozone. And the cuffs had left bruises that hummed. His hoodie had a damp patch where someone had set a knee. The MIT envelope was a dull secret in his bag. He thought of his acceptance letter, with the tender, peculiar fury of someone whose proof of future seemed a fragile thing to be folded and then exposed. He had rehearsed different futures in his head, walking the campus, the weight of his backpack, the light in the classrooms. Those rehearsals ended abruptly now, in the same place many futures end, under the weight of an unquestioned judgment. "Water," he said, voice small and hoarse. "Later," an officer answered. Later was an instrument inside the station, calibrated to postpone comfort. Malcolm swallowed back the heat of it. Outside, the noise of the world changed pitch. At the evening news saw an angle and clipped it to a segment plan. An activist who had once sat in council hearings texted 3 people and then posted to a feed where millions and dozens overlapped with equal force. The clip slid into the pocket of public attention with mechanical ease, and the station's calls began to multiply. "Do we have a flag on this yet?" a sergeant asked, because stations had become, in ways both recent and barely recognized, not only sites of enforcement but also of reputational triage. Blake heard the tone shift in the radio and frowned. "Who flagged it?" "Multiple sources," said a dispatcher. "Public, 2 reporters inbound, socials got a clip." He straightened. The paperwork no longer felt like a shield. It felt like a thin skin stretched over something that could be pierced by lenses and by names. He felt the small, hot panic of a man who knew his actions would be parsed not only by investigators, but by commentators eager to stitch a moral from the stitches of his uniform. In the vehicle in which Nathan White had sat less than an hour ago, the world had reconfigured. There are phones that lurk in pockets like small compasses. There are calls that turn private rooms into command centers. Nathan's palm was cold when he dialed. He did not think through steps so much as he enacted them. His career had taught him the precise sequence of measures to move a bureaucracy. He called the one person who could search for his child without the usual delays. Mara Klein, his deputy, the kind of woman who kept midnight lists and whose voice could make people rearrange calendars. "Mara," he said, and his voice held a tremor he did not let himself accommodate. "Find Malcolm, now." She spoke fast and sharp, inventorying possibilities. "Which?" "I'll send the clip." He didn't need to say more. She had seen him in the kinds of crises that required speed and a minimum of ceremonial permission. Mara's response was a contained storm. "We move quietly," she said. "No press. We find him, we determine medical, then we decide whether IA needs to step in. Tell me where you think." "North Precinct," he said. He had watched for landmarks while the clip looped. The municipal sign across the street, the angle of the curb, the pattern on the asphalt. In the small hours between father and director, he had learned to see both a child and a subject of institutional duty. The 2 roles converged now and created an urgency that cut both ways. "On my way," Mara said. The line clicked. She had already set others in motion. Nathan stood and moved without thinking of anything that could look like command theater. He only knew he needed to be where his son was, even if being there would require him to fight for access against the same apparatus he had learned to nudge and prod. Back at the station, Amanda's video was not merely viewed, it was translated. Every viewer pulled meaning from it and refolded it in the shape of their own preconceptions. Some watched with immediate fury. The sight of a child's letter flattened into the dirt read like sacrilege. Others noted the uniforms and crafted arguments that invoked policy. The clip's audio was incomplete. The camera's lens was intimate and partial. That incompleteness, rather than making the content less dangerous, made it more transmissible. People could lay their own needs across the gaps. A local reporter's phone buzzed. He dialed the station and was put through to a public information officer who had not been expecting to speak so soon. She read the boilerplate, practiced in the voice of someone trained to make statements that seemed to promise transparency while buying time. "We can confirm an incident occurred," she said. "An investigation is underway. We ask the public to allow the process to proceed." The line hummed with the polite falseness of standard responses. The report would be qualified later, polished for the air. The clip would already be 1,000 other things. "Notify internal," Blake said, and then he added, under his breath, "and legal." Reed watched him say it and felt a vertex of dread. Internal affairs carried the quiet of tribunals. They were the kind of institution that could turn a day's action into a career's climate. He thought he might speak, to call out what he had seen, to locate his own small responsibility. But the station's rhythm closed down the space for confessions. He found himself lined up with Blake, their roles making them allies by default against the awkwardness of being watched.
At home, Malcolm's mother, Denise, had been at her kitchen sink when her phone flashed with a looped video. The light in the kitchen made her look younger. The room smelled of the coffee she'd left on the counter. When she saw her son's face, there was an animal sound in her that was neither a scream nor a sob. She called every number she knew, not yet understanding that most of those numbers would only echo in the clipped form of the recorded moment. "Where is he?" she said, when a neighbor put her in touch with someone who had seen the clip. The neighbor's voice was small and thick, with the same unsure anger that made the rest of the city start to cup its hands around something hot. Nathan did not tell Denise to stay home. He did not tell her to wait in a particular way. He did not pretend that his position could magically create a different one for his child. He only moved with the purpose of someone who had seen the contours of a problem and discovered a familiar, bitter knowledge. Proximity matters. Inside the booking area, an intake nurse asked Malcolm a litany of questions. He answered mechanically. He felt the answers slide off him like
Water. When the nurse noted the bruises, she recorded them as minor abrasions, no visible fractures. The words were a medical taxonomy that narrowed the event into something the system could digest. Malcolm wondered if the taxonomy left room for humiliation. "Do you have any family we can contact?" the nurse asked. "Yes," he said. He wanted to say more, the letter, the campus, the laughing of friends. But the station's air had a way of making the future seem hypothetical. The nurse made a note and moved on. Outside, in an apartment 2 blocks away, a community organizer watched the clip on repeat and made a list of names of people to call. The list was a small, fierce thing. Attorneys, local council members, church leaders who moved people in pews, student activists from the university who could bring a campus to the square. She paced and spoke the names aloud, not because she feared forgetfulness, but because speaking them made the next steps feel less like an improvisation and more like a strategy. "I want cameras at that precinct," she said, to no one in particular. And then, because the world now favored immediacy, there were already cameras filing toward the lights downtown. At the precinct, a sergeant watched the feeds of social reaction bloom on a monitor, and felt the old, familiar sensation of being manipulated by forces he only half understood. He called for a briefing. "We need to ensure chain of custody," he told Blake, and his voice was the voice of someone constructing a defense he hoped would be robust enough to hold. Reed, who had never wanted the glare of a camera, found himself stepping aside to the locker room. He sank on a bench and pressed his forehead into his hands. Images unspooled. The bend of Malcolm's wrist, the look in his eyes when he saw the envelope. The thought that would not leave him was simple and gnawing. A 14-year career in service, and still no immunity from having made a wrong choice. Some choices would have to be defended, others would be owned. He did not know which his would be. Nathan's car threaded through streetlights and workers packing up storefronts. He did not think of how it would look for a man of his office to arrive at a precinct in person. He thought only of the boy in the video who carried an acceptance letter like a private prophecy. He pulled up, and, before he could form the words he might use with the officers, his phone buzzed again. It was Mara, brief and direct. "He's at North," she said. "We're on site. They know the family is involved. Keep your distance until we talk to IA. We don't want interference." Nathan bristled at the word interference. It sounded like a surrender that would have to be negotiated. He paused in the car and felt the dizzy, singular certitude of fathers who would reduce their lives to a single axis when their children were threatened. "Get him out first," he said. "Check for medical. Then IA. Then me." He ended the call and stepped out into the precinct light that smelled of bleach and late coffee. The station door closed behind him with a bureaucratic finality. Inside, voices rose and fell in a tone that would soon be measured and quoted. The room seemed to shrink around the clip that had already left it. Amanda watched Nathan cross the floor. For a moment their eyes met, and something like recognition passed between them. Two witnesses who had been pulled toward the same terrible thing without choosing to be. She felt suddenly small, as if the act of recording had made her both culpable and indispensable. She had recorded the red dot, the knee, the letter. She had given the world an image that would not let itself be put away. The world, in its various rooms, was making ready to judge. And in the center of it, a 16-year-old boy with an acceptance letter in his backpack sat and tried to remember what it felt like to have a future that was not interrupted by a photograph. The station's fluorescent lights cast their sharp, impartial geometry over everything, as if light itself might be trained now to keep watch. Outside, someone started a chant, not yet organized, not yet complete, and the sound found its way through the station's thin windows, a low thrum that felt like a countdown. Inside, the officers readied statements. Reed folded his hands in a way that was both a prayer and an attempt at steadiness. Nathan moved with the quiet of a man who had learned how to use his influence and yet wanted, this time, to be only a father. On a curb across town, a neighbor held a homemade sign and tried to teach a child why the picture mattered. The sign was clumsy but earnest. The child's face, half lit by streetlight, reflected the red dot of someone else's camera. The moment hung there, taut and unsparing, and it was not yet clear who would be saved by the coming scrutiny and who would be swallowed by it. Inside the station, the intake door opened again. 2 uniformed officers came back into the room, and one of them carried a clipboard. "He asks for a phone call," they reported, and the words landed like a small, inevitable fact. Malcolm looked up when he heard his name. The world had assembled itself into a composition in which he was both the subject and the evidence. He took a breath, and the air felt too large for his lungs. Outside, the chant rose once more, this time louder, as if the city's breath had been taken in and forced out together in one mechanical exhalation that would not stop. The clip on a glowing screen waited for its next interpretation, and the station braced itself for the first of many reckonings. An officer produced a battered cell phone from his pocket and held it out. Malcolm reached for it with a slow, careful hand, as if touching something fragile. He said the name into the small speaker, his voice thin, the syllables unfamiliar in the station's acoustics. On the other end, a woman answered with a breath that broke immediately into a question. Malcolm's fingers closed around the phone like a talisman. "Ma," he said, and for a moment his voice was only the effort of making sound. "I'm at North. He stopped. There was a pause long enough that the officers shifted, respectful and awkward. The woman on the line began to talk, a frightened jukebox of instructions and pleading. Malcolm listened. Now and then he answered with clipped assurances he did not feel. The red dot in the video still glowed on the inside of his eyelids no matter where he looked. Nathan remained at the entrance of the intake room, hands clenched in the pockets of his coat. He watched Malcolm speak and felt the old administrative scripts unspool under his feet. He had dealt with paperwork that determined promotion or termination, with whispered phone calls that rerouted investigations to protect a career. He had never, until tonight, had to decide how much of himself he would put in front of his badge. "Internal Affairs is on its way," said the sergeant beside him, voice careful. "They'll want to interview everyone. Medics cleared him at the scene, but we have protocols." Nathan's knuckles went white. "Let me in," he said. The words were not a command, but a plea. It surprised him how closely they bordered. The sergeant looked him up and down. "Sir, you know the process." "I know the process," Nathan said. "I'm asking you to let me be his father first." There was a small, private reckoning in the sergeant's eyes, empathy and duty in an uneasy accord. He stepped aside just enough for Nathan to pass. Nathan moved through the room with the awkward, precise gait of someone relearning how to be present. He did not immediately go to Malcolm. He watched instead as Amanda was led to a small table with a thermal writing pad and a pen, like an accused witness. Her phone lay between her palms like an evidence relic. "Miss Clark," the investigator began, eyes soft with procedure, "we need to take a statement and secure any footage you have." Amanda swallowed. The recording sat inside her like a live thing, its edges sharp. She had imagined this moment 100 times since she pressed record.
what it would feel like to hand over the thing that would not let anyone look away. She thought of the boy with the acceptance letter, of the way his fingers had trembled. She looked at Nathan and saw in his face the outline of someone who would cross lines for his child. The sight steadied her just enough. "I'll give it," she said.
"But you have to promise me it's preserved. No edits, no cropping. We'll preserve the original file," the investigator said. "Chain of custody, forensic extraction, you'll be asked to testify later." Amanda nodded. She handed the phone over. The moment her device left her hand, she felt as if she had set a seed into a field she could not watch. The investigator slid the phone into an evidence bag with the same reverence someone might reserve for a relic. Malcolm's call ended. He placed the phone on the table, fingers lingering as if reluctant to let go of the line to the world outside the room. Reed stood nearby, palms folded. The parish prayer habit of a man who could not make law but knew the muscles of consolation. "Malcolm," Reed said softly, "can you tell me what you remember before you called for help?" Malcolm swallowed. He tasted copper. "I was walking," he said. "I had the letter. I felt like crying because—" His voice broke. "I was going to show my mom. The rest folded inward, private as breath. The officers took down his words with a clinical tenderness. "Did you have anything in your hand that could be mistaken for a weapon?" one of them asked. "No," Malcolm replied, "just the envelope." Outside the station, the chanting tumbled into different shapes. Half a block away, someone beat a drum. Someone else shouted a name that might become a slogan. A pickup's tailgate became an impromptu platform for grievances. Phones were held up like lit beacons. A reporter's microphone appeared at a distant window like a stalk. Nathan could feel the pressure of all those eyes as if they pressed through concrete. "I want to talk to your attorney," he heard Reed say, not to Malcolm, but to an officer with a notebook. "But also, I want you to know," he looked at Nathan, "we're family. We won't let him face this on his own." "Who arrived with him?" the investigator asked Amanda as she signed the statement. "Nathan," she said. He wasn't there when it happened, but he came right after. She stopped, realizing the humiliating specificity of what she might say about his job. "He's his father." The investigator noted it. "We will need to speak with the responding officers," he said, "and you'll have to be available for the forensic interview." As if summoned, a compact sedan pulled up to the station's side door, and a man in plain clothes stepped out. He stood for a heartbeat evaluating the scene. His badge on a chain reflected the station's fluorescence. Internal Affairs. He nodded to the sergeant and entered with a purposeful, quiet authority. Nathan felt the air change. Conversation smoothed into forms, and the room's temperature shifted toward official appraisal. Mara appeared moments later in the doorway with the kind of composure that had always been a shield. She moved past Nathan with a brief, private look that said, "You're on your own, but not alone." She went straight to the IA agent and spoke in low, measured tones. Nathan saw the two of them exchange papers, names, reports, timelines. Authority convened itself in that tiny circle, and Nathan was left looking in. "You're here as his father," Mara said when she came back to him, the words lying between them like an assessment rather than a question. "I'm here," Nathan said. I won't use my badge. I need to know he's okay." "You can't be in the interview room," Mara said, "but you can be present in the building. IA will notify you when it's appropriate. Until then, let them do their work." Nathan nodded, because there was nothing to be negotiated. He moved to a bench and sat, feeling for the first time the physical weight of waiting. He watched through an inner window as Malcolm was led away for another set of questions. His shoulders slumped slightly with each door that swallowed the boy. Reed touched his arm once, an anchor. "Do you think they'll charge him?" Amanda asked in a whisper, voice brittle. Nathan wanted to answer with the certainty of a man who had written memos on lesser tragedies. The law, he thought, could be blunt and blank in a rush. It was not always shaped to hold the true contours of a life. He could not tell them that. Instead, he said, "They'll follow the facts."
"And the facts?" Amanda asked. "The facts are a clip, and a man on a bench, and a boy with a letter," Nathan said. "Facts bend around witnesses. They'll also bend around pressure." Outside the station's glass, the crowd had swelled. Toasted orange streetlights threw silhouettes across signs. The chant had found a rhythm and a melody, an inventory of anger and names. Someone unfurled a white sheet with words scrawled in marker. The station's thin walls could not keep sound contained. A television van parked, and the reporter's voice scratched like a match struck close to paper. Nathan felt the world converge to a single axle that included evidence rooms, legal pads, and the brittle, sacred thing a child carries toward a future. He thought of a different future for Malcolm, one in which the letter was only a hinge and not a line drawn through everything. He thought of his own son and the way he had tried to teach him when to stand down and when to stand firm. There was a calculus here Nathan could not reduce to rules or memos. There was, instead, an unanswerable ledger of risk and protection. "Mara," he said at last, quietly, "if IA wants to keep him from seeing a lawyer—" "They won't keep him from counsel," she replied. "They will control the scene so that the interview is lawful. That helps you." "It might help them, too," Nathan said. She met his eyes. "Then your choice is what it has always been. You can wait and let process do its work, or you can make a move that risks the very thing you say you want to protect." Nathan said nothing. The choice hovered, luminous and terrible. He could feel in his throat the memory of other choices he had made for the office, the times he had traded continuity for expedience. He had never felt so naked with the consequences. A deputy ushered Amanda back to the table. "We need the metadata from your device," he said. "Forensically sound copy. You won't have to delete anything." Amanda consented with a small, decisive sound. She felt as if by consenting she had turned the recording loose into a current that would carry both truth and consequence to places she could not see. Malcolm returned a while later, escorted through the same door like someone walking back into himself. He looked smaller, tired in a way that belonged to a person who had been asked to prove his life. Nathan moved to intercept him, but the officer that accompanied Malcolm tucked subtly between them. "Family visitation is scheduled," the officer said. "We have to clear it through IA." Malcolm's eyes found Nathan's across the partition. There was a short, private glance that was not yet father and son, not yet anything but two people caught in the same luminous net. Malcolm managed a small, crooked smile that was both apology and plea. "Hey," Nathan said. He had no shouts, no commands. He folded his hands as if in prayer and spoke as a father might speak when there is nothing to fix but language. "Hey, I'm here." Malcolm's breath hitched. Reed put a hand briefly on his shoulder. The world outside continued its litany until the station itself seemed to hum in time with it. The clip would be analyzed, statements compared, timelines constructed. For now, the process was what the city could hold: boxes, forms, an evolving lexicon of accountability. Nathan sat again. He watched as IA set up a small perimeter of desks and chairs like a temporary court. Papers were arranged into a geometry of authority. He looked at Amanda's empty chair and felt the absence of her phone as if it were more than plastic and circuitry. He felt, too, the weight of the public's gaze, which had the bluntness of a verdict and none of the mercy. The station's clock ticked onward. Reed whispered a short benediction to Malcolm as he passed. The boy tucked his hands into the pockets of his jacket and felt for the envelope that no longer rested heavy against his ribs. Somewhere outside, a chant rose and fell like a tide. Somewhere in the building, decisions were being made that would press into the marrow of people's lives. Nathan stood and moved toward the window that faced the street. He could see faces, names not yet spoken aloud, signs wobbling in the hands of strangers. He thought of the envelope again, of the way paper had become a symbol too, large for a single life. He thought of the choices that had to be owned and those that had to be defended. He did not yet know which of his would be which.
He only knew that the night would not allow him to be both father and official in equal measure. One of those roles would have to yield. He watched the crowd and waited for internal affairs to finish its first sweep, for the cameras to stop turning their lenses toward the station doors, for someone to make the first, decisive move. When the IA agent finally walked over, papers in hand and an expression that had learned to hide the friction inside, Nathan met him with a steadiness he would not otherwise have expected to find. "We're going to need a full list of witnesses," the agent said, "and you're going to have to file the proper request if you intend to intervene." Nathan inhaled and let the syllables fall into the sanctioned shape of calm. "I'll cooperate," he said, "but understand this. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking that a child not be made into a headline before anyone has the decency to hear him." The IA agent's jaw eased into something like concessional seriousness. "We won't rush the facts," he said. "We will follow them." It was a promise of procedure, not comfort. Nathan understood. He also understood that promises in rooms like this were sometimes the only place where justice began, even if it was a slow one. The agent turned, took a step, and into that brief movement the quiet architecture of work began to arrange itself again. Papers were shuffled, calls were placed, a lawyer's name was penciled in on a notepad. Outside, the chant found a new pitch, sharper, as if the crowd had decided to keep its breath until something happened. Nathan kept his hand on the cool glass of the window until his fingers lost feeling. He watched the city press itself against a story, and wondered what stories would live and which would be sacrificed. In the intake room, someone read from a rights card. Amanda had been given coffee. Reed moved between chairs like a man blessing a fragile procession. When Malcolm walked past again on his way to a recorded statement, his backpack slung over one shoulder, Nathan caught a glimpse of the acceptance letter peeking out at the crease. It was small, folded into itself like a private hope, and for a second everything else narrowed to the measure of that paper. "After this," Nathan said, almost to himself, "we'll get him out. We'll get him a lawyer. We'll get the facts," the IA agent finished for him, with the sober humility of someone aware that facts could be both refuge and revelation. They all settled into the measured rhythm of process. It would not be the end. It might not even be the right beginning. But it was something. A place where names would be taken down, where angles would be mapped, where the thin, terrible geometry of a single photograph might finally be understood in the fuller shape of a life. Outside, the crowd's chant changed from accusation to request, a demand for recognition that was as much about being seen as it was about judgment. Inside, the lights kept their clinical watch. Malcolm sat down at a table and folded his hands as if pressing them together could hold the world in. Nathan sat across from him, a distance both literal and symbolic, and watched the boy breathe. When the first recording began, the room went quiet enough to hear the mechanics of a pen. The city outside continued to make its noise, but inside that small circumference, the story narrowed to the sound of a voice and the weight of an envelope, and everyone listened for the moment the two would find their meaning.